So first of all, one of the things that's really important to have in front of you, if possible, is a Bible. So if you don't have, I see people walking to get them. It's not, and some of you may be using the online texts. So in other words, you know, you might not have the physical Bible, but it is helpful, at least as we're going to do breakout groups, and there may be some references that you want to look at. So if you have one handy, and if at least half of you have it, I would imagine we'll hit enough people having a Bible to be able to look up anything that you would want to look up. So what I'm going to do this week is very different from last week. Last week, those of you that were here know that we spent a lot of time looking at the sources of the Bible, of particularly Genesis. And the sources were these four major sources that we call the JPED sources. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that tonight. The major issue or the major concern with having that in your mind is that, number one, the Bible was really not written by one person. You know, the Hebrew Bible was not all written by Moses, and the Psalms were not all written by David, and on we go. So just to bear that in mind, I think most of you would understand that. But I thought, and Tom and I both thought, that one of the more interesting things was that there was just this tremendous amount of time, about 600 years, when it was all these stories were being, and this narrative was being developed and evolved over 600 years as oral history and as an oral tradition. So one of the things, again, that I said last week, but I think is really fascinating about that, is that part of what we are doing, even in studying these texts, is bringing new understandings to them and enlarging the texts. And by that, I mean that it's not that we're changing, it's not that we're changing the essence of it, but as you investigate any of these stories that we're going to look at tonight, you realize that you are carrying in images, ideas from the 21st century, that this is arising out of a period of history 3,000-4,000 years ago. So anytime that we're looking at texts, we begin to say, whoa, you know, this is a very, very long time ago that these were originally written, and they have actually, the scholarship and the understandings and all that continues. We continue to explore what was going on then. And even as important, how does this address us in our lives? And I'm sorry about my dog. I have no one here to manage her. So you'll hear her just, you know, every now and then chirping. So what I want to do tonight is I want to do something that I have wanted to do since I came to Fourth Church. And those of you that have been on adult education in the past know this about me, that my interest is really to do a sort of sustained engagement with the biblical narrative through a theological lens. Now, and I'm going to get into that, so you don't have to know exactly what I'm talking about right now. But one of the things that excites me about the compilation of who you are as Christian adults at Fourth Presbyterian Church that I have gotten to know, and almost everybody in this room I have some connection with beyond this particular class, is that there is a hunger to go deeper and to really dig into the narrative of our faith. But even more, there is a hunger for God. And there is a hunger to know who God is in history, in these biblical texts, who God is as revealed in Jesus, who God is in the way that the Spirit works, and who God is in your life today. So tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to do theology, and we're going to start thinking theologically. Okay, so there. Good evening. Glad you're here with us tonight. Welcome. So we're going to spend some time tonight looking at all these texts through a theological lens, and I'm going to give you some guidance in order to be able to do that. And I'm excited about it because I think you're going to really really see this in maybe some new ways, and we'll see. So just real quickly, so who is God is at the core of theology. Theology, the study of God, theos, logos, the word of God, God's understanding God through theos is really where we are. And so last week, we talked about God in these two creation stories. So those of you that weren't here last week, we looked at the first 3+ chapters of Genesis, and we realized that there are two different stories. And in some ways they complement each other. There's similar things in them. And in some ways they are completely different. But if we look at who God is being revealed at the very, very beginning of the entire Bible in these first two stories, we realize that God is actually presented with in two different ways, by virtue of even the word that is used for God, the Hebrew word that is used for God. So last week we realized that the God of the first creation story, which runs the whole first chapter into the second chapter, verse 4a, I think it is, that God's name is Elohim. And Elohim is a plural word. So it's sort of like, not that God is pantheistic, God is not multiple beings, but God is expressed through a kind of range of understandings. It's almost like the creation was so big that you couldn't get one singular God word to do the creating. And there's also this whole thing about let us make humans in our own image, and it's the plural there, which really is a kind of ancient understanding of a heavenly court. So if you think of God with God's messengers or beings in that court, that's sort of what the understanding was, and it carries through in this term Elohim. So that God, the picture of that God, is a God who brings forth the creation by a word, and that creator God is a God that we might think of as transcendent, big, beyond us, and sovereign or all in one. So, and also universal. So the sovereignty and the transcendence and the universality, big words, but of God are seen in this God who created in a very, very clear way in a 7 days of creation, okay? So that's a very different God than we see in the Yahwist, or the Yahweh God, which is the word for God that's used in the second creation story, which begins in the second chapter of Genesis and moves through to the end of, I believe it's the third chapter. I don't have it right in front of me, but I do have a Bible. But that Yahweh, which is kind of more the term that we think of for God as throughout the, particularly the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, is seen as one God, personal and immanent and close. This is the God in the second creation narrative that takes the dust of the earth and creates Adam, or human, kind of man, a man, and then goes through and in the end creates woman. And as we talked about last week, and that Meg O'Hara actually had a great question for me during the week, so feel free to ask questions. But how was it that was sort of, if the woman was sort of taken from the man and was the helpmate and that kind of thing, then how did she end up being sort of the crown of creation, which is the understanding of that? And it really has to do with the fact that in the Hebrew understanding, or in the Middle Eastern understanding, if you will, oftentimes things are flipped around from what we think. We see it so much in the parables of Jesus, where, the last will be first, somebody comes to the table last, but gets the same amount of money, or comes to work last, gets the same amount of money as the first. And we're always, fussing with it, preachers especially, because we're trying to figure out what was going on, that it feels like Jesus was always flipping everything on its head. Well, in a sense, that is the kind of understanding that this story, that it moved toward excellence or move toward beauty or fullness in the way that you begin with man, and then you move toward creating woman, and it just gets better and better. Now, that's not to put down men. I'm aware that we don't have a lot of men in the room here. That is not a put down at all, but I think it's a different assumption and a different way of looking at those creation stories that at least I grew up with. So it's sort of like, well, there's man and then there's the woman, and she gets taken from the man, and so therefore she's, taken from him and secondary or something. The other thing is the word for helper, often is termed out of Hebrew as help meet, not help mate, but help meet. So it's this sense of that the woman is the help meet, coming to meet the man in the task before them. So it's sort of like this really interesting connection. So all that is a little boilerplate of who is God and who was God even as we began this. So what I want you to do is to really tonight continue to hold the question before you, what it is, who is God, and what is God revealing about God's self in these narratives. And it's hard to do because we carry in all these years of understanding these stories, but also we have a particular way of understanding who God is in our mind, both in terms of the image of God, but also the way that God acts. And I think in reading these stories tonight, we're going to get a whole range of things about God that may not square with maybe what you understood God to be coming into this. And it's really, really important to be very honest with discomfort, but also to be very honest with looking at this through a kind of fresh eye. Because part of the reason Tom and I chose Genesis as our starting point is because it gives us a chance to sort of push pause on all that we've known, certainly carry in our questions and our understanding, but really begin to encounter God in new ways in relooking at some of these texts. So I hope that's making sense to you. So thinking theologically, this is going to be our task tonight. And as I said, Genesis gives us a chance for a fresh start. It also gives us a chance to allow the story to speak to you and not to necessarily you speak to the story. So there's these two things I want to go over real fast, something called exegesis and eisegesis. And I don't have this written out on my PowerPoint, so I'm just going to talk about it. But exegesis, basically, not Jesus like Jesus, but Gesus, means pulling out of the to take out of the text what the text is revealing to you. So rather than, and the other is eisegesis, which means reading into the text what you want to read in. So the worst thing that happens with this, or one thing that happens from my perspective, is that as a preacher, so I'm going to preach on Sunday, I open up the text that I'm going to preach on, which happens to be the 10 people who were healed and the one who came back to give God thanks and the 9 that went away. So, it's easy for me to kind of start with that text and come in with a eisegetical hunch and say, okay, I know that everybody's feeling like we really want to be thankful. So I'm going to find Thanksgiving in this text, and I'm going to find stories that will, tell me that that's what this story is about. And what may happen to me as I really delve into the text is that something brand new shows up out of that text I had no idea I was going to even preach on, much less see in the text. So I think a lot of times, especially in some thematic preaching that preachers do, where they really want to get a point across about something that's going on in the church. And so they look at the text, they go, okay, yeah, we have conflicts. I'm going to find conflict in the text and we're going to just use it to get that word out. And for me, that, though there's moments when maybe that needs to happen, I have to say that it's a little bit dangerous, because then you just start kind of preaching the text that you want to preach and what you want to preach. But it's not only in preaching this happens, it's also in reading these stories that we're going to look at in a couple of minutes, and kind of carrying in all that. Oh yeah, well, when I was a kid, I had, like Frederick Buechner said in his sermon, I had that little Noah's Ark thing, and it was a nice thing for me as a kid because I like lining up the little 2x2. And that's what it's about. And then you begin to realize, whoa, God was going to destroy the whole deal, and it came through by the skin of the teeth that there happened to be one person with a family that was righteous. So we begin to look at it that way. So do you have any questions about kind of what I'm getting at here about thinking theologically and about God? Any responses to that before we go any further, or any questions?
I did have a question, Lucy. When you talked about Elohim being a plural way of thinking and talking about God, I startled myself at not being upset or angry about that because it felt right because of the Trinity. And the detective stories that I've been kind of immersing myself in and trying to write have all said, get something that's a puzzle in chapter 1 and then reveal it later in the book.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Very interesting, Margaret.
Thank you.
That's exactly what, yeah. And what else? What else comes to mind as we begin to launch into this? I mean, I'm glad to just launch because we've got a lot to cover. Okay, well, let's launch. And then if something comes up, feel free to, and we're not using the chat feature, by the way, folks. I just can't manage that, trying to teach and do chat. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. I can see you all and we're good. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to launch right into the first story. And this is, again, just to remind you, and those of you that weren't here last time, this is the primeval or prehistory of the Bible. So basically these stories in chapters 1 through 11 are not in the way of history like they will be starting in chapter 12, insofar as, honestly, and maybe this is the first thing we have to get our head around, but there probably wasn't really a Noah in the human being Noah. And so I think the question Joy asked too about, you know, all the narrative of all of the generations and naming them all, we don't know. And we'll do some more work on that, because I do think it shows up again and again and again in Genesis. There are all these chapters that go through all of these sons and daughters of people. And so it's an important, that probably could be a whole class right in and of itself. So let's circle back to that question about the legitimacy and the validity of actual, why are all these names in here if it was all prehistory and we don't know if they were really people or just images. But I think what that's trying to be said is that there's got to be a way that we all got here. There's got to be, I'll get to you in 1 second, Craig. There's got to be a way that we all got here. And so this is a way of explaining it. We got real names, you know, kind of lined up from all these people that showed up. And if we're realistic about it, I mean, yeah, it will be. Okay, Craig, what was your question?
I was going to add, years ago, I heard a wonderful sermon. The pastor used a chapter from Numbers as his text.
Oh.
The whole thing. And it was a genealogy like we're talking about. And noted that how much of that there is in the Bible. But there's a lot of things that you might like to know. I wouldn't it be fun to know what color Jesus' eyes were or what kind of clothes he wore or something like that? Doesn't say. The Bible gives you on a need to know basis. And you don't care what color Jesus' eyes were. It'd be fun, but it didn't make any difference. But to God, it was real important that all that history be there. And history is very important to the whole story.
Got it. Yep. Oh, that's fascinating. That's really fascinating. I know it's so interesting how people say, well, I started reading the Bible, I got to Numbers and I just gave up. Like, you know, it's like, I really wanted to get all the way through it, beginning to end. I got about there, it was like, there Leviticus or some of the, you know, anyway. All right, thank you. So again, you know, you all are going to bring interests into this that are going to be, you know, take us into some directions. I'm going to be responsive to that. And I also realize we have an hour. So, you know, we may be doing more Genesis in the future. So we're going to start with the first story. And in this case, we're going to stay in the full group and we're going to work through this first story together. And then what I'm going to do on the last two stories, so the flood and the Tower of Babel, we're going to talk, what we're going to do first is Cain and Abel. But we'll do the other two. I'm going to have you get into some small groups and follow the same pattern. So tonight we're going to begin with the Cain and Abel story. And what I want us to do first, and what you'll do when you get in your small groups, I'd like for us to tell the story of what happened in just your own terms. So if I could get one of you to launch into what was this thing with Cain and Abel? What was the context? Who were they? What happened? What happened next? What happened? Where was God in all this? Just tell the story, because I'm going to assume that you've read it, and we're not going to read it. I just want us to do a narrative remembering of what the story is about. So is someone willing to just start, and then we'll do a little embellishment? You don't have to tell the whole thing, but who's got at least the key points? You don't have to be scared, because we're not getting graded. This is just getting it out. Okay, is that Debbie's hand?
Yeah,
Debbie, go. Yes.
I'll give it a shot. Okay. So Adam and Eve started to have kids, and Cain was born first, and then Abel. And Abel was like a shepherd, and Cain was a farmer. And then they made sacrifices to God. And for some reason, God didn't like Cain's offering. It doesn't really explain. That confused me. But he liked Abel's offering, and so Cain got really mad, and so he went and he killed Abel. And then when God came around, he said, "Oh, Cain, where's Abel?" And then Cain acted like he didn't know. That's the famous line, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And then finally he fessed up, and he got kicked. Cain got kicked out and had to go live somewhere else with his wife. I don't know where these other people came from. If it was only that one family, but anyway, there were other people there somehow. And he got this mark on him, the mark of Cain, which is actually protection. It's not a curse; it's a protection, because nobody was supposed to kill him then. So anyway, that's my synopsis.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. So what would you add? Anybody want to add anything else? But Debbie, go ahead, Alan, and then Allison.
I like the detail of his punishment was the ground was going to even be harder to work. It was going to not yield as well or whatever. And so the Eden problems with weeds and whatever, now you're going to have to work harder to get the land going.
So Eden shows up here in an indirect way. So we're kind of back into tilling the soil, but man, is that going to be hard?
Yeah.
There you are. Okay, Allison, do you have something else to add to that?
That God does sort of give Cain a moment after he's first gotten angry about the offering not being accepted. God comes to him and says, "Oh, why are you so downcast?" But it's sort of like, if you do well, it will be accepted. But if you don't, then sin is sitting at your doorstep.
Mhm.
And Cain doesn't do anything with that.
Yep.
And then proceeds to go ahead and kill Abel. But it was like there was a moment of opportunity, maybe, but.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, Charlotte.
What strikes me is this when he says, where is your brother? I mean, God really knows that he killed him. And it reminds me of the Garden of Eden when he says, "Why are you hiding?" God really knows why they're hiding. So it's kind of like he knows what the truth is, but he likes to call people on it just to make you sort of admit it or fess up.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. And that's exactly the kind of thing that I want us to kind of pursue in terms of, is God just setting people up, or is God playing dumb, or is God, who is this God that's, kind of, the people are hiding, they've got their, in the creation story, where are you, and the people are hiding and they've got their little loincloths on or whatever I don't know what they're wearing, but, and God says, "Where are you?" As if, and then, "Oh, I'm here." Well, what happened? Tell me a story. So the question is God all knowing?
Mm-hmm.
Does God really know everything? Or is this an honest question?
Lucy?
Yeah.
It strikes me as the first search for a prayer of confession. maybe it's something about how I grew up in a very Presbyterian home. But when something was wrong and I had done something wrong, I was expected to say what I had done wrong.
Oh, well, that's true. Maybe it's just maybe
Yeah.
it is a request for come clean,
Mhm.
put it out there. You put it out there, then I'm able to deal. Okay.
Yeah. And with the farmer and the shepherd, it goes right back to last week, and we have erred and strayed from thy ways like lost sheep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And there's a whole study. I mean, Walter Brueggemann has done a lot of work on this whole thing around, nomad and landed people, and that you can almost look at the entire scope of at least the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and particularly, Abram being asked to uproot, and so there's this whole subtext around people who are the wandering ones, the shepherds, and then the grounded people that are into literally the ground. And that's another whole narrative piece. But again, we're not going to focus on that. Joy, you look like you're about to say something.
Yeah, I had the same troubling thought that Debbie had when she first gave her synopsis, is that, I mean, one of the core beliefs I think we have is that who you are is enough, and the gifts you have are enough. But yet it seems that the gifts of the wheat, that was not enough. And that's troublesome to me as I think about, what kind of a God is this?
Yep. That
in this instance, it doesn't seem that what he brought was enough.
Okay, so is anybody going to come to God's defense here? I'm just asking. In terms of, because I have a question here that I was going to ask you. Is it confusing that God sort of taunts Cain in this narrative by showing preference for Abel's offering? I mean, what do you make of that? So go ahead, let's talk some more about that.
It is a little confusing to me, but I think it was either Carl Reiner or Mel Brooks who came sideways to God's defense about a very early biblical story by saying, well, God was a lot younger then.
Yeah, okay, all right.
I think God's acting a lot like any parent or any school teacher. What happened to your homework? I don't know. No, what happened to your homework? Where is your brother?
Yep, maybe. Ken, you had something in the Maryland.
Is that part of the Yahwist version? The Cain and Abel thing? Cain and Abel, they were taunting.
I don't have my Yahwist partner here, so I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Because the Yahwist story is very folksy and has a lot of sort of humor to it.
Yep.
When I've noticed it.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. I think most of these were Yahwist. Most of the rest of this narrative was Yahwist as I was looking at the material.
They see God almost as a person.
Yeah.
Very personified, like you said, close, imminent, as opposed to ethereal and transcendent.
Yeah. I think that's pretty clear in all of these narratives that we're looking at. And I think that the Yahwist strain was going through this. It's also, there are some, particularly when we get to Tower of Babel, it really becomes priestly as well. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. But, in terms of, if you remember, and those of you that weren't, again, here last week, we did talk about that the first creation story came out of kind of a priestly tradition in the sense of it's almost like liturgical, or, and God said it was good, and God said it was good, almost like call and response. But it was actually written at a time when the people were in captivity in Babylon. And so it's a very interesting to look through the lens of people in exile and realizing that this became almost like sources of comfort. So you could imagine if people are in exile for some of these stories, particularly the Tower of Babel story, how they're hearing that from being far away from groundedness in home, and so there's all kinds of questions like that get raised. But let's go back to God And let's let's look at the story again in terms of what is showing up here. In terms of kind of God's plan for the way that things were supposed to go once, that the creation was good, the creation was to be that God created in a beautiful way. God wanted things to be good, but the thing God did in the creation was to give the human being freedom to choose. So in the second creation story, remember that the created person was given freedom to make a decision about whether to eat of the tree of knowledge. And that is this dilemma or this tension all the way through these stories, that you have God creating with purpose and will for creation, and that it is good, and is calling people to a faithful response and glad obedience. Okay, so in the creation, that is the aspiration, but within it is freedom of people to be able to make a decision whether they are going to respond that way. Because otherwise we'd be automatons. I mean, God would have created and just said, I'm going to make it the way I want it, and you're going to have no freedom. And this is the problem. And so here we are with these two brothers, and one of them gets very, very angry, perhaps taunted into anger by the way that God made a decision. It's not clear in the text why it was God didn't like the offering. So then, was it a setup?
I was wondering if it wasn't just a way of saying that God prefers like an animal sacrifice, and true worship needs to involve animal sacrifice versus bringing forth grains. That's the only thing I could come up with.
Is that good enough though? Well, go ahead. Let's just, I mean, is that enough? To really warrant the rage, I would say rage that came from that. I mean, we all have preferences, but Allison, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I mean, are we just missing part of the story? For whatever reason, it wasn't included, so that the way in which Cain made his offering was somehow inappropriate, while Abel did it better.
Yep. Actually, I think that was in the footnote in the Oxford Annotated Bible. I use that as my study Bible, and I think there was basically a footnote saying there could be parts of this that we just didn't get, so that well could be. Yeah, go ahead, Craig. And then Charlotte.
It seems to me it might be just some illustrations of life. In the earlier chapters, we found out why women have painful childbirth, why people feel they need to wear clothes. This is a story about why is it hard to till the ground. Sometimes sometimes the boss makes a real unfair decision, and you got to live with it, or else you get in trouble.
That might be.
Things happen in life, and it's an explanation of it.
God is boss. Okay, Charlotte, one more, and then we're going to move to the next story.
Building on what Margaret said about God being young, I was just thinking this was before there was a "thou shalt not kill." So maybe for Cain, getting rid of Abel was a just solution, a good solution.
That's an interesting perspective, because in a way, a lot of what we're going to have in these stories that we're going to look at in Genesis really do lead into Exodus and into giving of the law. And so it's almost like there is this constant sort of pattern that we see in these stories that God creates, and then something goes awry, and then there's sort of like this faithful remnant or faithful few, or the one who leads them out of captivity, the heart out of captivity, the people out of captivity, and then there's the promise or the kind of new beginning. And I just think you're going to see that pattern all the way down with it. And it really is what is propelling us toward the Exodus and toward God giving of the law and making a nation of these people. So there's all kinds of things that you're going to begin to get little kernels of as you begin to look at this and begin and get a glimpse of where this is all going. Does that make sense? So
It does. I see what Charlotte was thinking of, that it was before thou shalt not kill. And I suppose all of us in some degree could think of times when a parent has had to say, well, I didn't think I had to spell it out this much to you kids, but here's the rule.
okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the flood story. And I actually would like to, can I just, I have a couple of questions that I want you to discuss in small group. And one of the things a little bit awkward that maybe Ellen and I can take care of in the future is how to get these questions into the breakout rooms. I can put them in the chat where you can see them, but once you go into a breakout room, I don't think you can see the questions that are in the chat. Am I correct on that, Alan? It doesn't matter. Let's not even fuss with it. So
I think if you make a co-host, they can share the screen in this breakout room, I think.
Oh, really?
But you need a partner. You need a partner.
All
But
right.
I think one of the things we could do is, I think there's a broadcast message that's possible to all breakout group people.
Okay.
So we could
All
just type that in. But anyway.
Okay, well, tonight, let's not do that. And then I'll learn to do that before next week. But what I'd like for you to do, does some of you have pens and paper somewhere in handy? So I just have 3 questions that I'd like for you to discuss related to the flood story. And then I'll give you instructions and then we'll get into some small groups. So the first question is, I'm going to make it really short. Do you think of God as a destructive presence? Second question, can God change God's mind? What does that mean? Or does God have the question and the answer in mind all the time? And then the third question is God's promise in the flood never to destroy the earth again by flood relevant today? So do we believe that if God is God, what do we do with this environmental crisis where floods are happening all the time? You know, and it raises again the larger question of what does it mean to be omnipotent, all powerful, and all knowing? And is this the God that we know? Is God holding this thing and not going to let it destruct?
Lucy, could you go ahead and give me host power so I can start putting
Yes,
people?
yes, sir, I will. And again, I hope we can do that better this week. So did somebody, how many of you got at least 1 or 2 of those questions? Because you kind of see where I was going with them. So
all 3.
you're in the group. And if you want to talk about something else in the group besides that, fine. And hold on, I'll give you host power.
And 12 minutes?
12 minutes,
And
yes.
4 groups, right?
4. How many of us are there? 1, 2, 3. Why don't we do 3?
Yeah. Oh, 3
3 or
groups,
4.
fine.
Yeah, let's do 3 groups.
Okay.
And hold on, I need to make you, I always forget where I go for this. I'm sorry.
Under the participant list.
Yeah, oh, I go to you though. I don't go to me, right? Yeah,
Right.
here we are. Okay.
Make host.
Make host, there you are. So you're the host now. So I am, so what I'd like for you to do before I get in rooms,
It's not working yet.
there it is.
Oh,
should
there
be.
it is. There it goes. Yep, I got it. Yep.
So what you're gonna do, 3 things. First, number 1, tell the story to each other. And this one's got a little bit more to it. So you probably have to kind of spend a little bit of time. Number 2, who is God in this? So the question really becomes, you know, what do we learn about God in this story? Okay, that's just kind of the general theological question. And then the 3 questions about destructive presence of God. Does God change God's mind? And what does that mean for our understanding of God? And then get into the environmental question. You can take any or all of those. You have 12 minutes and then we'll come back together and we're going to have a discussion. Okay. I guess what I'd love to hear, I mean, because I don't get to be in your groups. So I really want to hear what you talked about. So any of the questions, what was did you discuss it? I know you went over what the story was, the narrative. But what was a compelling thought or question that came up for you that you would like to share with the other groups?
We talked a little bit about the nature of creation. In order to create, you have to destroy because you're making something new. And so as a scientist, matter cannot be created or destroyed. So you gotta like rearrange, right?
Okay.
So it's like there's gotta be destruction to create something new.
And I think we all agreed that God can change God's mind.
Yeah, that's right. It's part of the creative process.
Changing your mind, smashing down I always think of the pot that gets shattered, to create something new. So what else? What else did you talk about? What did you learn about God? That's the real question tonight.
It seemed kind of destructive. He seemed like God seemed like God was destructive. And it seems not in the nature of love.
To destroy. So love for you is what?
Well, now that's a good question. If I have to define it, I'm in trouble here.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm just curious. I mean, from what I'm hearing, it's the opposite of destruction. So it would be creation or wholeness.
Yes,
or,
yes.
I don't know. I'm putting words in your mouth.
I
but
like
I'm
that.
curious.
I'll take that, Lucy. Thank you.
Well, no, I'm not trying to make it something it's not, but that's what I was hearing. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
What else? What else did you discuss? Annette, please.
Well, we didn't discuss this, but something was just said that I reacted to, which is God and his mind. First of all, I don't think God has a mind. I don't think we know who God is. I think God is a mystery.
Yep.
And the more anthropomorphic terms you put on it, the further away I go.
Okay.
Because it is not how I believe.
Yeah, I agree with her.
Someone in our group came up with the word incomprehensible, and Margaret said she thought that was in the somewhere in the Reformed Confessions.
Either the Westminster or the Scots. I'm a little shaky tonight.
I'll look that up tonight and see. Incomprehensible. Well, I think it can be helpful to not get, okay, that's not a good sentence. It can be helpful to see God in the ranges of ways that God presents God's self. So we really have, again, in these first two creation stories, two kind of visions of what God's revelation is. So one is the God that reveals that God is the creative force, that, it's not necessarily the white guy, the white man with the white beard up in the sky. That's not working these days in any sense of the word. But it's also the prime mover. I mean, aren't there philosophical traditions that talk about the prime mover, the first movement?
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other hand, if we're created in the image of God, this is where it gets into the anthropomorphic, okay, that God, how else are we going to imagine God? And also, how are we going to see ourselves if we're created in the image of God? Is that just some kind of a inner being, kind of like, oh yeah, well, my spirit's kind of that, but God isn't this? Then what is God? So I think it's the human mind trying to wrap ourselves around what is this and how can we understand God most fully and not get stuck in only God being like a human, but a superhuman or a more human or whatever. Yeah, Sylvia, help me.
We are an Eastern people, right? And so I'm having trouble figuring out the importance of understanding God in Genesis, except as a a good exercise. So the question I have is why you chose Genesis. And I bet you have a really good answer that will help me get over this hurdle. I mean, I love studying it as an exercise, but I tell you, I'm much more comfortable as an Easter person.
I think that's a really interesting question and a really interesting perspective. And I have to say that what tends to happen is that we as Christians always are reading back through the Easter narrative into the history. And so that there's a little bit of danger in that doing that, insofar as, again, we tend to then read through and back and not be able to understand what was the kind of foundation out of which Easter came. So I guess what I would say is the reason that we wanted to start with Genesis, we could have started anywhere in the Hebrew Bible, really. Could have started with the prophets. We could have started with Exodus, could have started with Deuteronomy, could have started with Ruth. I mean, we could have started anywhere. But I think what I discovered, and I have to say this comes out of my own history a lot, because I grew up in the Baptist church. I grew up as a New Testament person. And when I got to seminary, I was just absolutely taken with starting with the Hebrew Bible, because that's what the foundation of where Jesus came from. I mean, Jesus was a rabbi. Jesus knew the scriptures. And so I think it's kind of holding that intention is what I would say. And I think it's a very healthy tension to really stand and say, I'm an Easter person. I'm a post-resurrection, this was the moment, but to realize that the person of Jesus Christ was a Jew and what came out of that history. So that is a lot of the reason. And the other thing I said at the beginning is that it's a fresh look, forcing us to look at a fresh view of who is this God that is revealed throughout the scriptures. Old and New Testament.
The first couple of verses of the Gospel of John take Jesus right back to the beginning too.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was part of why I was so comfortable when we talked about Elohim being a plural God. Well, of course, Trinitarian, there you go. And I'm relating again to all the detective story reading that I do, which I refuse to call mystery stories, because Genesis and the creation and that sort of thing, there's a mystery. We're not going to know the real answers on this side of the creation. But the detective story is here's where the problem started. And as Easter people, we know what the last chapter was. We know how things turned out. We know that we got rescued. But here's how we got to the island in the first place.
Well, can we just have two more comments? Marilyn and Joy, I realize we're at our time. This never is going to feel like enough time, but we're going to crowd ourselves, going to force ourselves to stay within the bounds, at least with a little grace. Okay. So Marilyn, did you have something? And then Joy, I think, had something, and then we'll talk about next week. Okay.
Yeah, I was actually going to make just a quick comment, if I could, on Sylvia's question, which is, besides this motif of light, which Craig brought up, which I love how that tracks through all of the Bible. I think the story that you also have starting in Genesis is God is God and humans are not God. And humans always are testing the limits in some way, but there's always a reconciliation. So I think that, to me, is also what I'm taking away from this, that you see again and again throughout the whole Bible, is the second chances, the reconciliation with God.
Thank you, Joy. And that's really the pattern that I think we're seeing even right now in these first two stories, that there's a tragedy and then there is a kind of, we'll figure out how to move. God will come and not abandon us. So I want to finish with a quote by Walter Brueggemann in Inning. But Marilyn, you've been trying to get in. What were you thinking?
Well, I'm a scientist, and I don't believe that people understand Well, they certainly didn't understand it 5,000 years ago, but the concept, I mean, even now we don't understand, humans can't understand the concept of infinity. So there is no beginning. There is no end. God is infinite. And the people that were writing Genesis at the time, they were trying, as in their human minds, they were trying to conceptualize the beginning of life, the beginning of humans. And it's totally from 20th century, 21st century science doesn't make any sense. And humans, including us Christians, are just trying to justify ourselves as being organisms on this planet. And so, what we're trying to do is justify ourselves and just justify our beings and supposed superiority over other organisms. And it's just, it's disconcerting to me. I'm just one organism on the face of, in the control of God, in the control of Jesus. I believe that. I'm at their mercy. And my takeaway from Genesis is that God can create. We don't know when it happened, but we are just one little cog in the huge wheel of this whole thing called evolution. And nothing else matters. And yes, in the 21st century, this planet is going to take a deep dive, because humans have been totally stupid, and we're not going to save it because we're totally idiots. And God is not going to save this because we don't have predestination or anything. So that's it. I'm done. Bye.
Well, on that note, but I really think sometimes it is helpful to recognize the complexities that get stirred up in our own mind. I mean, I think about that a lot. I mean, just in terms of who are we and what are we about and what's our purpose in being on this planet? Are we an organism? And all these kind of questions are just so basic to us. So so I want to express my gratitude to all of you tonight for going along with this idea of really beginning to look at these big questions that are core to this, and not being afraid to step forward with some controversy and some challenges, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to dive into this material in any depth and any growth opportunity. And I also want you to know that I do not have the answers. I'm a fellow pilgrim with you through this exploration. I'm learning from you. Okay, so it's very mutual. I studied this stuff for a very long time, but frankly, there's so much more to know and so much more to learn. So I want to close tonight with just a beautiful quote from Walter Brueggemann, which I think leads us into what we'll do next week. And I'm just going to quickly give you an assignment, and then I'll have Louis Hamer send out the assignment again. Walter Brueggemann says, he's the scholar of this book called Genesis. It's a big commentary. It's about that thick. He wrote massive amounts in this. He says, on the whole, it is clear that the purpose of God will not leave the world alone. You can take that in a couple ways. God is patient and will wait. God will never abandon the world. And he goes on to say, this is good news to a bewildered community of faith. And I think sometimes we're bewildered as a faith community, wondering what we have to offer this world and what the church and the community has to offer us. But it is good news to those who believe that the world is autonomous and must make its own way. And I believe the fact that God will not abandon us is good news for us tonight. So thank you for that, and thank God for that. And that is my prayer in closing. So very quickly, just really super, super fast, I want to just remind you, this week, we didn't get to Babel. So we'll just do a quick pass on Babel next week. Then we're going to move to the historic narrative of the saga of Abraham. And so the suggestion is that we read, and this is a big chunk, 10 chapters, 10 to 22, I'm sorry, 12 to 22, chapters 12 to 22 in Genesis. I know it's a lot. It's wonderful reading. It's wonderful reading. So we're in the whole piece about all the narrative sweep of Abram and Sarai, who become Abraham and Sarah. She'll read and move through that. So please just take time, read through it. If you don't get to everything, don't guilt yourself. We'll have a chance to go over it next week, but it'll be really fun to begin to work with real people, historic people, and it'll all build on where we've been. Any questions? We're going to move through this very fast. This is 50 chapters in 7 weeks. So you're going to get big chunks and you get smaller ones. But Lewis will send out any supplemental material. I really like the idea of trying to find sermons, a few sermons on this, or maybe a little bit extra reading. I'm going to look into the whole genealogy pieces this week and see if we can do a little sweep past that too.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So I hope you'll return next week and there'll be a few of us added. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
Thanks,
Have a good night.
everybody.
Bye.